Hi, my name is Emma Keith. This is my research video. The title of this video is American Sign Language Classifiers and Reference. So I started seriously learning American Sign Language, or ASL as often referred to, when I was around 18 years old. I remember as I started to learn the different vocabulary and different specific words, as most languages start, I would be conversing with a user of American Sign Language, whether they be deaf or hearing and fluent, and we would be conversing, signing back and forth, and they'd suddenly fingerspell, which is spelling the name of a word or an object using ABC letters of the word, and then point to their left, to their front, or to their right. And I would be confused, and I would look in the general direction of where they would be pointing, and then I'd look back at them, and then I'd look back, and I wouldn't see what they referred to in their fingerspelling. I expected to see the person or object that they pointed to, and when I'd look back at them, they'd kind of look at me funny and kind of laugh a little bit, and then it would be this whole confusing situation. Now, I didn't know at that moment that what they were doing was using ASL classifiers. So ASL classifiers, to give a bit of a brief, are hand shapes, gestures, and mime-like actions based on a set of rules, specific rules within the language, that provide further information on the nouns and the verbs in ASL discourse. In essence, it's a tool for reference towards referring expressions with specific hand shapes and gestures utilizing the space around you. In this topic paper, I will argue that spatial classifiers are necessary for reference in American Sign Language discourse as I compare and contrast ASL with English discourse. I used three main sources for my topic paper, which provided helpful information for me that I will be referring to throughout the course of my paper. The first one is by Lori Swaby, and she wrote a paper called Referring Expressions in ASL Discourse. What she does is compares and contrasts the different use of referring expressions both in English and in American Sign Language. She demonstrates and proves through her methodology and her analysis and discussion that speakers of a spoken language can and do use the space around them for reference, but that ASL has specific rules against that, or for that rather, regarding space that must be adhered to in discourse with another user of American Sign Language. The second article is by Wilbur, Bernstein, and Cantor, called The Semantic Domain of Classifiers in American Sign Language. So they kind of go over a little bit of similar things that Swaby went over with the use of space in referring expressions. However, Swaby mentions nothing about those space, entitling them and labeling them as classifiers, where Wilbur, Bernstein, and Cantor label that as, yes, these are classifiers that these users of American Sign Language are using. Classifiers fall in the rules of the language. And they explain how classifiers in ASL give pronominal semantic structure to ASL domain. Lastly, I was able to use the textbook that we used this semester in class, Semantics, a Coursebook by Herford, Heasley, and Smith. I was able to use this textbook for a lot of in-between odds and ends, such as going further in depth on deixis and how that can be related to in American Sign Language as I applied it, and what it means to have deictic words, and cooperative principle and Grice's maxims, which goes over about what the Grice's maxims are, and specifically with quantity of how we must, as humans and conversers, share no more or no less than what is required in everyday conversations, whether that is violated or adhered to. These are the references that I'll be referring to throughout the course of this topic research video. Because of the nature of my topic and my thesis statement, I didn't want any number formulated electronic survey or any numbers involved in my methodology. I was thinking about what I wanted to do for my methodology, and I realized that speakers of American Sign Language are a very visual people. They are face-to-face conversers, and they converse through the movement of their hands and their bodies. So with that, I didn't want to send out an electronic survey to users of American Sign Language as their native language, because that would kind of be like controversial almost. I would be asking specific questions about their native language, asking in a language that isn't their native language. So I thought that kind of defeat the purpose a little bit. So thinking about that, I decided to do two main things for my methodology. The first thing is I looked at children's stories, videos of people telling common children's stories for the information of the viewer. My stories that I shared were Goldilocks and the Three Bears and the Three Little Pigs and the Little Red Hen as my main three stories. I was able to see these stories and see how both English tellers and ASL tellers were able to use their space or lack of space in reference and referring expressions and what they did to communicate the story across. I also looked at everyday conversations, particularly common storytelling. For example, what happened over the weekend, or what you made for dinner last night, or how that date went last weekend, and kind of looked at and observed everyday situations that happen in everybody's lives. I wanted to do this in addition to the children's videos, because I wanted a more of an informal analysis. I kind of observed without telling them you're going to be observed from a bystander point of view, so as not to skew my data at all. So I was able to look at these analyses and see how they use their space in their everyday storytelling or lack of space, particularly in classroom settings and club event settings. So my main analysis for this second portion took place at Brigham Young University in the American Sign Language Club events that happen weekly, as well as American Sign Language academic classes. For your information, these analyses mostly took place with adults ages 18 to 30 years old. First, I'm going to be analyzing the children's storytelling videos that I was able to watch. So the first thing that I noticed and was able to look at were the use of deictic words. The semantics textbook that we observed during class this semester says, "There are good reasons for all languages to have deictic terms. A language without such terms could not serve the communicative needs of its users anything like as well as a real human language." American Sign Language is no different. We have deictic words, but we have a different system of utilizing them. So in the English stories that I looked at, the storytellers were able to use these words such as he, she, today, there, tomorrow, etc., while American Sign Language often uses a different system, which is often utilized through indexing. So in ASL, indexing is a system of pointing to use for reference. So I'm going to look at the story, the Goldilocks and the Three Bears, for example. Goldilocks goes in and sees 3 bowls of porridge. In English, you would see this as demonstrating as Goldilocks went to the first, then the second, and the third. However, in ASL, you have to use your space. So we mentioned Goldilocks going in, and the storyteller would point to the right of his or her body and create the bowl in the right of her to show and demonstrate that this is Goldilocks' first bowl that she'll be referring to. She then points next to the first one in the middle space, creates a second bowl to create that second bowl that she'll be referring to, and then lastly the third bowl to the left of her. So here we have indexing being utilized to point out and refer to the first, the second, and the third bowl of Goldilocks' porridge that she will be eating in the course of the story. Indexing is used to demonstrate these 3 bowls and show how space can create this element of stories so that the listeners, quote-unquote listeners, of the story can understand what's going on and where these bowls are in reference to Goldilocks. So what about double deictic terms, such as he blew his house down, such as used in the Three Little Pigs? These are 2 different ways that you can utilize this. The first one is creating 2 areas of space, what we call in ASL as role shifting, of space to refer to each referent. So you'll say, the wolf blowing the house down. You are acting as the wolf and using your hands, creating a gust of wind to show he's blowing the house down. So you're the wolf blowing the house down, And suddenly, with this role shift, as my body shifts to a different position, you are now the pig cowering as the house is falling underneath of you. So first you are the wolf blowing the house. Role shift, you are the pig cowering as the house falls. This is just a first example. In second example, you use motion. As ease for this example, I'll use the example, he drove him home. So you'll first use indexing to point to the first referent or referring expression, and use that he drove, the sign for drove, him home, and you'll mention it as he drove him home. So he's the he, drove John home. So you use the motion of the sign to demonstrate he, John, drove him home. See that motion of the sign for drive and utilizing space around you. The second thing I looked at were everyday conversations. The first thing that I noticed was the different use of finger spelling. So the object or person is normally in conversation fingerspelled once, using indexing to create a space, and that space right there, or whatever you create it to be, is the space for the rest of the story. So for example, if you're talking about an oak tree that fell down, you'll say tree, fingerspell oak to specify which tree it is, and point. From now, for the rest of the story, that space is what that tree is going to be. Fingerspelling is used to create that initial understanding, and then you'll utilize classifiers to continue that understanding for the rest of the story. Swaby in her article says, if a signer assumes that the entities being referred to are at the center of attention, these entities are likely to be referred to by the form that explicitly signal informed status. I was also able to see and notice in everyday conversations Grice's maxim of quantity being broken. This is really fascinating in American Sign Language. ASL takes pride in their storytelling. They use the space around them, their faces, their classifiers to create and bring the story to life, essentially. It's very exciting and they love it. But with that, they often tend to break the maxim of quantity as per that language culture. They provide as much information as they possibly can to give the story life and meaning and reference. So if you ask someone, for example, what they did that weekend, don't expect to be sitting there for a quick 1 minute, oh, I went to the gym and worked out and that was great. You should expect to hear a very long, drawn-out story of how that experience was, where they were at different parts of the story, utilizing multiple areas of space and what happened in each areas of space, utilizing a person or an individual or the gym. And they draw out stories as much as you can. With that being said, leaving conversations in American Sign Language often takes quite a long time due to this. Those were the two different things that I was able to analyze for my methodology. In American Sign Language, there are 8 common specific classes of classifiers that are specifically used to denote common hand shapes or gestures within classifiers. So we have semantic, descriptive, instrumental, element, locative, body, body part, and plural. Like I said, those are all very specific ways of demonstrating classifiers. So semantic, for example, would be the use of the one hand shape in demonstrating a person walking. This would be a person walking. Or for an element classifier in the 3 little pigs, for example, this would be the wind, using the element of wind in your hand shapes to create that gust of wind, etc. These are all different rules that exist in American Sign Language to create life. However, age changes the way that people communicate, and my analysis mostly consists of young single adult individuals, and I wonder how that would change if I was able to get more participants from different age range, from ages 5 to 10 or 60 to 80. I notice through analysis of young children informally that they tend to use indexing a lot, but they don't entirely understand the specific classes of classifiers such as semantic or descriptive or body, body part, etc. So I wonder how that would have changed my data if I had seen people of different age ranges using a minimal set of classifiers that infants slowly develop throughout their course of their lives through experience and observations of the fluency of those around them. We've talked about a lot today. We've talked about deixis, the cooperative principle, reference, referring expressions, the use of space, and much more to demonstrate how classifiers are used in discursive American Sign Language. And I argue that as seen through classifiers in everyday conversation, ASL speakers must use shapes, hand shapes, and rule-based hand movements, role shifting, role playing, facial expressions, and hands for reference in everyday discourse. This is seen through the use of storytelling and everyday conversations in the world around me. In the future, I would like to study how ASL speakers communicate with English speakers and how they utilize different classifiers, different classes of classifiers to get their point across to a listener who doesn't understand the ASL speaker, how they use their hand shapes to show the English native language speaker what they mean through their space. I would really like to understand more about how classifiers can leak into more languages, but that the English language doesn't need to use it, so they don't use it. I am very passionate about American Sign Language, and I know that classifiers are essential in my language as I have developed my skills and fluency in my acquisition of American Sign Language. Thank you.